On Time with Dr. and Serge Logtech podcast.
Sergey, welcome again.
Hi, Doc.
How are you?
Good. Thank you.
All right. So, welcome to episode 10, right? And as we talked about previously, I think the podcast is doing well. You know, some videos are getting more traction than others, especially the shorts. But today, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which I think you are also interested, which is demand forecasting. Now, I'm going to start with the statement of, I think demand forecasting is overrated and demand planning is underrated. Right?
How so?
How so? But I think before we do that, I can explain my point of view, right? You know, I've written a lot of documents on sales and operations planning. I've written a lot of blogs on demand planning and demand forecasting. This is one of my, let's call it bread and butter. I make most money in actually training sales and operations planning, demand planning. So I've got a lot of, let's call it practical and coaching and consulting experience on this. So I can talk at length on that. You know, I don't know a lot of stuff, but this is one of my strong suit, if you want to call it. Since you are a more logistics kind of person who's seen or learned about demand or heard about demand planning and forecasting, what's your understanding before I go a bit technical?
Frankly, I know nothing about demand forecasting.
All right. That's a good start.
I know what demand planning and demand management is.
Okay.
So demand management means that you know that on Friday, that will be a low day. And on Monday, you will have a peak. And on New Year's Eve, you will have a bust sales. So you have to plan your staff and your resource, not just resources, but packaging material and all that according to cycles, weekly cycles, monthly cycles, yearly cycles. And if you don't manage, you will get out of paper or people. That's what I know.
All right.
So, and probably this is more valuable than forecasting.
I think you explained, but from my point of view, it's not even a chicken and egg problem because demand planning do not exist without demand forecasting. Because demand forecasting has to happen first for demand planning to start. Allow me to explain. So demand forecasting exists for at least 30, 40 years. You know, there's because when I was doing my PhD from Lancaster University, you know, there's a full management department who just basically research on forecasting. So forecasting could be, demand forecasting could be qualitative or quantitative. Quantitative could be a classical time series methods of, you know, exponential smoothing and so on and so forth. It could be just moving average forecast. It could be simple, the math and divide by whatever time period. That's quantitative method, and it's getting stronger and stronger. There's like 600 different, quantitative forecasting logics exist. 600 is a lot of choice for do it. And
wow.
Yeah, and therefore most of the software would say we will pick the best fit, and the best fit simply meaning that certain logics does better in certain demand patterns. So for example, if you have a cyclic demand forecasting, there's a logic which fits best. If you have basically you need a forecast which is over the period of time, certain logics is better. And then we move to regression. So for example, there is a demand forecasting open source available. It's called Profit, right, by Facebook. It's basically for weather forecasting because it's a regression method, because the weather have like millions of thousands of points to predict the weather. So it does better in regression, does better, or Profit does better in that sort of environment. But when you talk about units and pieces, that doesn't do very well. So you understand what I mean, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Depends on data set. So that's the quantitative method. Qualitative method is based on people in human judgment, which is sometimes does very well, right? Okay. An example would be a new product introduction of some sort or a new vertical. So this is where people can go talk to the customer, get the information, they use the experience, gut feel, whatever. It would be a good example where the data historical existing was no good. So this is where you have to use some human judgment, some expert opinion to make a form what's going to happen. But in either case, when you use qualitative or quantitative or combination of both, you form a future prediction of what you're gonna sell, just to take example, or what you're gonna buy, or what will be the future look like. But that's numbers. That in a nutshell is demand forecasting, because we essentially talking numbers here. But demand planning is essentially, it starts from there. So you start from your base forecast, which is essentially unconstrained. So once you create the quantitative forecast, then you have to go through the method of taking inputs from the stakeholders.
Can forecast tell you that it's minus 1.2 boxes?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean, yes, minus from what? Negative.
No.
That won't happen. But that's something that could only happen if you're good enough
Okay.
to say somebody gonna return something in next 3 weeks.
I thought that would differentiate it
No.
from planning. Like you have to
No.
correct the
If somebody's
prediction,
good enough in
forecast.
forecasting, telling
Mhm.
they will be returned in 4 weeks' time, then you can say -1 would be. Otherwise, it's not.
Okay.
Right. In general, it's not. So demand planning is taking the input from your sales and marketing, promotion, economics, socioeconomics factors, and so on and so forth, and then come back to the plan of what you're gonna sell. It also includes basically taking input from your suppliers, taking input from your capacity, warehouse people. Are we getting enough people or not? Enough capacity, enough machines. Then you come up with the consensus demand plan, because then you say to the management or leadership team, this is what we're gonna sell, right? That's our demand plan. And this is what we're gonna load in ERP. Because what the biggest mistake I have seen it happening is people only do forecasting, meaning they just run the numbers, they did the maths, and they go ahead and order material without talking to the right stakeholders. And then this is where it's a very fundamental issue, but it happens quite a lot, right? So
Can you give an example?
it's just creating POs
No, I
and work.
mean, what problems will it bring?
Okay, good point. So if you just go ahead and order without talking to the right people, that means you're ordering stuff which we basically don't need. You haven't really talked to
But AI told me.
AI. AI can do that.
Predicted. Forecast.
AI can do that.
I still
Right.
don't get it.
Okay, that's a good point. Let's assume you're even using AI. And this is my second biggest bugbear with the whole demand planning is that I've seen so many posts and some gurus on demand planning and forecasting writing books talking about you should not use Maypay or you should not use that forecasting error KPI because it's giving wrong information. Frankly, it's all Mickey Mouse. And I don't want to name the company because it's one of the biggest. They won an award of the best supply chain. Don't want to name it, but anybody who's watching this video probably know who I'm talking about. They use one of the biggest software. They use Connexus. It's $1 billion company. I mean, license is like Connexus don't even touch a company if you're not $1 billion. This is their starting point. And I talked to them a couple of times and said, if you can get us a customer $1 billion plus, we want to hire you as our evangelist. I said, I can't, because if you come to Middle East, there's only 6 companies who's basically $1 billion. The rest are less than, they're medium-sized companies. They're not America, right? Anyway, so they use Connexus, right? Connexus does what Connexus does, good or bad, doesn't matter. But they download the whole output into Excel, and the demand plan is play with it and then apply the manual input. And I'm thinking, why you are paying, $300,000 for an annual software? You spend literally more than $1 million. If still gonna play around with Excel to make decisions. The point I'm making is following. Despite people are paying hundreds and thousands of dollars for the software, which could be Blue Yonder or or many other available Connexus, they are not using to make the right decisions. Again, with this point, I want to hand over to you.
I can't understand that. I do understand, for instance, I've asked AI forecasts, like how many pink live elephants I will sell in Birmingham in winter instead of like 15. And I go buy 15 elephants. That I can understand that. I should talk to someone. But if it will tell me that you should buy 50 cartons of lumber or apples, why shouldn't I do that?
Yeah, but that's incomplete information.
Should I talk to decision maker?
Yeah, but this is incomplete information, right? Because if you're using a demand forecasting and planning software, this information should come up with some kind of error, because that information had come from where?
For instance, I used to buy 10 cartons of apple.
Yeah.
And now software telling me buy 50 cartons of apple.
So gone up 400%, yeah.
And the error would be what in that case?
Yeah, but okay.
It should tell me like it's 15 forecasted, but plus minus 100 cartons or something like that, or plus minus 40.
So if I understand your example, so it was 10 historically, has gone to 50.
Yeah, software tells me it's going to be 50.
But based on what?
I don't know. I fed it with some Excel sheets and
exactly right. And this is what I'm talking about. If you just feed the information, it has to come from somewhere. It has to be substantiated by some information.
Tell me why.
Decision.
It hasn't told me, then I have to talk to someone to explain me why, right? Okay.
Absolutely. But
I understand.
Thank you. But reverse the example here. You historically been selling 50, 50, 50 or, plus minus that 5. But then suddenly someone said to you, we're going to sell 10. Okay. But that's suddenly, again, why it's going to happen. And there's possible why it's going to happen. That is fine. It happens in most businesses. What doesn't happen in most businesses that after making that decision, if the decision has been made, is to follow through. That follow through part is important. Meaning, did you order the 10? Did you order the less than?
Right. Yeah,
right?
yeah. That I also can understand. Like, oh, it's 50. Nah, it wouldn't be. And then all the forecasts are useless if you don't follow.
Absolutely correct.
Advice.
So there's our book reading. Book was on investing, but there was a quote on Warren Buffett on that book, because the shares and investing is essentially kind of forecasting on a lot of factors. So the quote was like from Warren Buffett that forecasting tell you less about the person who is doing the forecast. It tells you more about the person or the culture of the company you're working with.
That are not using forecasts or data.
Or optimistic or not optimistic. Because I worked in an organization where the decisions are made to the scientific judgment, to forecasting, planning, sales and operations planning. They're pretty robust. Then everybody's aligned. Decision could be made bad and good, but at least there has to be a reliability and coherence on those decision making. This comes from the culture of top down. But I've also seen organization where everything is so much focused on get me sales that the forecasting process or the planning process behind it, nobody gives the monkeys, right? But effectively achieving sales is a function of how good or bad you are in demand planning. And a lot of people ask me this question, and I'm going to ask you this. Who should own demand plan and demand forecast in business? Who should own that as a function?
Oh, it depends on the size of the business, of course.
Okay, I mean, you define the size of the businesses in 3 different categories, and you define who should own where.
Okay, so if a business already run by a committee, a board, and all that, huge companies, yes. Yeah. Then if it's Apple and is a forecast of how many iPhones they will sell, that's up to the board to decide.
Okay,
yeah. If the company runs by an entrepreneur, then it's up to that entrepreneur
company,
small company. But there are this huge amount of middle companies where no one is in charge of nothing, and that's problematic. I think
they have a sales function, they have a supply chain function, there's a finance function.
But if someone's in charge of the whole company, if the KPIs are blurry and SCM, like supply chain division is in charge, or I don't know, sales division is in charge, kind of, but they are not fined for bad decisions or for diverting from those forecasts and all, no one will be paying any attention to.
That is one of the structural or cultural dilemmas, not structural. I think
cultural
is a cultural dilemma. Who owns it? Because nobody actually wants to own it. I could debate here, sit down for another half an hour, that marketing or sales should own it. And I can also debate by saying there's a sales shouldn't own it. And mostly the business I work for, the demand plan is as an owner is end up in supply chain.
Yeah.
Why supply
Which is
chain?
useless.
They are not selling. They are not selling. They are basically deciding based on the demand plan and focus given to them what to order, what inventory should have to maintain the customer service in the lead.
That got me thinking. So if you're a manufacturing company, then marketing should be in charge, because the job of marketing for the manufacturing company is to feed you with leads just enough to to get the manufacturing busy. If there will be too many leads, too much sales, then manufacturing will be hurt. If too few, again. So their job is just to give enough leads for the manufacturing to do their job.
And distributor companies as well.
Maybe. I don't know much about the distribution companies. But for other companies, if you're not constrained by some kind of manufacturing or supply, then it can be sales, because they are now unconstrained by the manufacturing or so, and they can sell whatever they like. I don't know, books, eBooks. So supply of eBooks is infinite, and demand for eBooks, if it's predicted, then there is SCM also involved in that, probably, even in digital goods. But I agree that the culture is the pinnacle. Yeah. But for some companies like manufacturing, it's no brainer that marketing should be in charge.
But but they don't want to be, in my view. They want to have a strong opinion on it. But if you say you own the focus, they're going to say, nah, sales own the focus. That leads me to the second point. One of the challenges was to ask a sales guy, tell me what your region or customer focus. He's going to say, I don't know. just run the numbers. I was like, what does that mean, run the numbers? You should know what you're going to sell. It's your accounts, it's your customers, right? It's what it is. So the best case scenario I used to do when I was supply chain manager director was, okay, ask my demand planner, okay, run the history, send it to the sales guy and see if he or she would agree with it or not. And even in that case, you send them a numbers, half of them don't even respond. They say, yeah, just use whatever you got. And when things goes wrong, they blame the forecast. If you don't have the right inventory. So, and this is again the point of the culture shift. It comes from top down, right? When the leader would say, no, you should know what you're going to sell.
See, yeah, I'm in software. So my forecasts, like sales forecasts, are done by sales, and probably not a good thing. For me, maybe also marketing should do that, but it is done by sales.
Okay.
And there's a huge disparity between those roles of sales. So sales are in charge of closing the month. Yeah. No, closing the lead to hit the monthly quota and maybe yearly quota if they can. But forecasting for sales is really hard, because if it's even hard to chase a lead if it's out of 3 days or 1 month, like if it's not a hot lead that they're going to close, it's hard for sales just to track that lead. So the job of sales is just to close the deal as soon as possible, like drive that deal to the close. But also I asked them to do forecasts, like sales forecasts, which is the thing that they don't like to do. And most of the time they are right on their forecast.
They don't like to do is still right though.
They are still right.
But I would add the role of two more functions who should play a big part, but they don't as much. For example, finance people. Finance people only worry about money, dollar sign. But that sign is effectively a simple equation of units you sell in a not non-service business or even a service business. What are we selling? Multiply by how many at the price what you sell. That's the number. So they're very keen to know that, because the whole FP&A forecasting, budget they're gonna sell, financial planning, profitability, and all that depends on that number. But in my view, they always take the demand planning forecasting done by supply chain people or maybe marketing people in some businesses very conservatively. So if you give them a very optimistic view of something, they're going to say, nah, I'm not really sure. Let's we use this word called sandbag.
Yeah.
Let's knock it down by 5%. Let's under promise over deliver. Let's, we don't want to make the board unhappy or the shareholders. And I think that conservative view of slightly sandbag or this approach of under promise over deliver is not effective. I know most financial people will disagree with me, but that's their opinion. Because if the business or the sales group or the let's call it a regional planning group and the salespeople are saying, oh, we're going to sell more, we're going to have a really good month or really good quarter, then you should believe them and hold them accountable. Why are you going to knock them down by 5%? Because that 5% makes a big difference on them making the effort to reach that 5% or not. Because as soon as they find out, oh, yeah, we still got 5% buffer not to hit it, they just don't. They're going to move to next month, because it's easier for them to move to next month and then hit the goal next month.
Sure.
So that negativity doesn't help. The second group I want to mention is the ops group. They just somehow think we are the recipient of that information and we got no input to give. And that's a very, very wrong thought process in my view. Because the ops people who are responsible for having the right capacities of people, machines, the facilities also have a great input to give. Because if they're going to, and that same goes with suppliers as well. You send a supplier a forecast, he would never come back and tell you, sorry, I cannot do, or I can do more. They hardly do that. And they should do it, because that affects the whole demand plan as well going forward. But so that's my view based on experience. But I want to move the discussion to what's happening with the technology. And you are the expert, being a software engineer and running a Cleverance as a CEO, which again, you talked about the forecasting. There is a myth of sorts. And we talked in episode 9 about the advent of AI agents. And we briefly touched base on what they can do or not. And if you have not seen the video, please go and see a video. It's a fantastic video we did. Do you think the whole enigma of demand planning and forecasting would be improved and resolved with the whole AI agents?
Again, I'm not sure about forecasting itself, but acting on numbers for sure will be improved.
Yeah.
Because if not a human, but this over-human, above human level operational excellence will reach every logistics company, then of course you will see improvements because it will act immediately. It will act on forecast. Like, so see, like your SCM guy will receive a forecast like on Friday. There will be demand and we'll tell, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to pay for extra staff or something. Yeah. But AI can leverage on that. Like maybe not, but let me write 5 emails and ask for extra staff. If so, they will be 5 a.m. They will be at my doorstep helping me. Yeah. So because AI could do that operational things, not just more precisely, more vigorously, 10 emails in 2 seconds, that will raise the level of acting on forecasts for sure. So management. So not demand planning or forecasting, but demand management, managing the things you have to do in order to fulfill the forecast. I think that those things will be improved.
I think the AI could help at 2 different levels right now. I think one is easier than the other. One would be as an assistant of demand forecasting, an agent who is basically guiding demand plan to saying, okay, based on history, ERP data, all that, you're making those changes. I don't think this should happen, or you should do it because of certain factors has changed, so on and so forth. Economic factor has changed, the vertical factor has changed, and so on and so forth. Because basically getting the information from the news, or, there's a shipment being stuck on Suez Canal and you won't be able to ship it.
Yeah.
But that's is I think comparatively easy to achieve, and some best forecasting softwares are doing it. But what I think would happen, and I want to give an example of what you said in episode 9, that agents are capable of doing stuff which human can't even think of. I think you give a very, very interesting example that, they come up with a new logic of doing something. So therefore, I think if the technology is there, and one of my recent, point of research is, if you somehow teach the AI agent, you know what, these are all quantitative method, the 600 algorithms of computation, as you said in episode 9, that LLM can talk to these equations, because they're essentially 600 equations, right? Use these equations, use machine learning equations, use all of that, and then come up with a demand plan, and actually explain me how you come up with that, or demand forecast and explain me how you come up with that.
What I'm trying to say is that if I have 2 options, a tool that will predict how much can I spend on Christmas gifts for my whole family and friends, and the tool that will do the actual purchase, so I don't have to, I will choose the latter. So what I'm saying is that tools of predictions might improve, but agents that will do the whole thing, that will act on prediction, they will change things.
And so I'm talking about the one on your right side, actually, the one who's actually going to do it. And I think that once that sort of AI agent who can do the demand forecasting and explain and create dashboard, they will be game changer, and it will happen, in my view, sooner now with the technology existed rather than later. And the companies who will adopt that, and the business who will adopt that, will see huge improvements in their both bottom line, top line and bottom line.
Okay, we will see that.
We will see that. Even with that, I'm going to add with this joke I finished with all of my demand forecasting lecture, because I think demand planning and forecasting, or not planning, actually, demand forecasting is like making love. Everybody does it, but nobody knows what's the best technique. But I think I will be wrong when the AI agents will be there, and they might find what is the best technique for making love for you and your partner.
No, we don't want it. Please don't.
Demand forecasting for your business. Anyway, so that's a good example. So with that said, any final thoughts on this?
So AI agent that will not just tell me how to do love, but do that without me. Very bizarre. Hope it will never happen.
I hope so as well.
But let's hope that we will act on forecasts more
thoughtfully, and analyze it and make decisions. That's my, if I have to say something on this, is demand forecasting is overrated because we put too much time and effort in forecasting, but demand planning is underrated because we don't spend enough time and focus on the decisions you make, right? And closing the loop and following it through. Even though you make decisions, you don't follow through. Following through of that decision is important because you gain confidence from it, right? And the businesses who does that get more reliable, more stable, more cohesive.
Yeah, just do your routine. I mean, it can subscribe you a gym routine, language lessons routine. If you don't follow that, no
point,
no results.
Cool. I think we should end now. Thank you for watching, for all of us, and supporting us, subscribing to our channel, and of course, subscribing to our podcast.
Yeah, please do
and
that. Click on that button.
Click on that button, and I'll see you in the next episode.
See you.
On Time with Dr. and Serge. Logtech Podcast.